My name is Lillian Bullock, and I am a 27-year-old woman who has found her calling in peace working as a librarian in a small, hidden town, tucked away from most people's sight. This little corner of the world, almost lost on maps, has become my refuge, where my existence, though perhaps too simple for some, feels full and harmonious to me. I have always felt a special pull towards solitude, finding comfort and peace in books, hiding behind their pages from the hurried pace of the outside world. The library became my sanctuary, my personal paradise. Every morning at 7, I unlock its doors, turn on the lights, and the air fills with the unmistakable scent of old pages and ink. This simple ritual repeats day after day, but it never grows old to me. After I lost my parents at a young age, my grandmother took on the responsibility of raising me. She was the embodiment of kindness and wisdom, always steering me toward books, guiding me on the path of knowledge, teaching me to seek life's answers within their pages. But now she's gone, and I'm left alone in this world, with no siblings or a large family circle, leading my quiet, humble life. Each day begins the same. "Good morning, Lillian," greets Mr. Andrew, our regular patron, who is passionate about history. His warm greeting is followed by his steps toward the shelf where I've already set aside some new history books for him. Seeing his grateful smile brings me quiet joy. My day is made up of simple yet significant moments like these. I help children with their school projects, select romance novels for Mrs. Kimberly, and guide Mr. Raymond to the latest science fiction releases. This steady rhythm of life fills me with a deep sense of contentment. Everything was going as usual until one day, Henry walked into the library. From the moment I saw him, it was clear that he wasn't the type to be accustomed to the quiet calm of our town. His confident stride, impeccable appearance, everything about him stood out from our regular patrons. "Can you help me find a book?" he asked, his voice warm and easy, carrying a tone that was unfamiliar yet intriguing. "Of course. What are you looking for?" I responded, struggling to conceal a sudden nervousness. Henry was searching for The Great Gatsby. As I led him to the classics section, our hands briefly touched, and that fleeting contact sent an unexpected shiver through me. That moment, seemingly insignificant, left a deep impression on my soul. "Thank you, Lillian," he said, noticing my name tag. "It's nice to meet you. I'm Henry." His smile stirred a strange, fluttering feeling inside me, something new. From that moment, my journey began, a journey toward discoveries I never expected to find in the library. After our first meeting, Henry started visiting the library more frequently. It seemed odd, considering his polished demeanor didn't quite align with the image of a typical book lover. Yet, each time he stepped through the door, his steps led directly to me. He always sought recommendations for his next read, but he lingered longer than necessary for a simple book selection. Our conversations grew more frequent, and time with him seemed to flow differently, slowly, effortlessly. One day, he walked in just as I was struggling to lift a heavy box of newly delivered books. Seeing me in this awkward battle, Henry immediately offered his help without waiting for my consent. Gratefully, I accepted, and soon we were shelving the books together. In the middle of this task, he suddenly asked a question that caught me off guard. "Lillian, what brought you to work in a library?" It was a simple question, yet it carried a deeper meaning, and for a moment, I hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, I said that books had always been like faithful companions to me, ones that never let me down and always offered comfort. Plus, I cherished the quiet and calm that reign here. At this, Henry laughed softly, his laughter echoing gently off the library's walls like a soft breeze. "I get it," he said. You really can feel like you're in another world here. With each visit, our conversations grew longer, gradually revealing hidden corners of our lives to each other. I learned that Henry worked in his family's real estate business. He spoke easily about his job, but what mattered more to me was how comfortable I felt around him. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly seen. In his presence, I wasn't just a librarian in a quiet town, I felt like something more. Then one day, out of the blue, Henry asked, "Lillian, would you like to have dinner with me tonight?" There was a flicker of hopeful uncertainty in his eyes, and his invitation caught me by surprise. "Like a date?" I asked, a little embarrassed. "Yes, like a date," he confirmed with a smile. I paused for a moment, unused to such invitations, but there was something in his gaze that made me say yes. "Sure, I'd like that," I replied, feeling a soft flutter of anticipation for what the evening might bring. We spent the evening at a small, cozy restaurant. It wasn't fancy or luxurious, but it had a warm atmosphere that made for relaxed and heartfelt conversations. We talked about everything, from books to life, and time seemed to stand still, allowing us to connect. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had stepped out of my usual solitary life, sinking into the pleasant company of Henry. On the way back, he said, "Lillian, I had a wonderful evening. You're unlike anyone I've ever met." His words filled me with a warm, almost awkward feeling, and I just smiled in return. "I'd love to see you again if you wouldn't mind," he continued, his voice full of genuine hope. I couldn't refuse. A nod and a quiet yes were my answer. From then on, our meetings became regular. We'd have dinner together or take walks through the quiet streets of our town, savoring every moment we spent together. Gradually, I felt my life, which had for so long been composed only of books and silence, start to take on new colors. Henry proved to be not only attentive but also surprisingly charming, and every conversation with him left me feeling as if I were becoming more important and meaningful. When Henry suggested something more, I agreed without hesitation. But looking back, I realize I should have been more attuned to the subtle signs that soon began to appear. The problems with Henry's parents began from the start. Their disapproval of me was obvious, as if they had long since formed their opinion on who should be by their son's side, and I clearly didn't fit their idea of the right match. The reason for their displeasure was simple and painful. I didn't come from a wealthy family, nor did I possess the glitter and status they deemed necessary. Our first meeting took place over dinner at their lavish mansion, a stark contrast to my familiar world. Everything in their home, from the crystal chandeliers to the mirrored surfaces, screamed of wealth, a world I had no connection to. "Lillian, this is my mother, Michelle, and my father, David," Henry introduced me, his tone reserved. I tried to smile, despite the overwhelming sense of not belonging. "Nice to meet you," I said, though deep down, I could feel every word I spoke being weighed under their scrutinizing gaze. Michelle's eyes glided over me, a flash of judgment visible in her expression. "So, you're the girl from the library?" she asked, her tone laced with a hint of mockery. "Yes, I work there," I replied, trying to sound confident, but under her piercing stare, my resolve slowly faded. David, her husband, was even more blunt. "Couldn't you have found someone more suitable?" he asked dryly, his disdain barely concealed. His words cut through me like a cold wind, making me wish I could disappear in that very moment. The dinner felt interminable, a slow, painful reminder that, in their eyes, I wasn't worthy of their son. Yet, in those moments, Henry stood by me, his support only deepening my attachment to him. However, things worsened as the wedding approached. Henry's parents insisted on a prenuptial agreement, claiming it was a mere formality that wouldn't affect anything I owned. I agreed, not wanting to create more tension. After the wedding, I moved into Henry's home, technically a gift from his parents, though they acted as if it still belonged to them. Their visits were frequent and unannounced, as if they were the rightful owners, and I was merely a temporary guest. "Lillian, make us some coffee," Michelle would demand every time they came over, and I, eager to avoid conflict, complied without a word. She often reminded me that, in the event of a divorce, nothing in that house would remain mine. Her words were like constant jabs, reinforcing the feeling that I didn't belong, that I was merely an outsider in their world of luxury. But the worst part was how Henry began to change. Slowly, his warmth faded, giving way to a coldness and indifference I hadn't seen in him before. One evening, while we discussed what I might wear to another family gathering, I sought his opinion, but his response was icy and dismissive. "Maybe wear something that makes you look less plain." His words were meant as a joke, but they stung deeply. The laugh that once warmed my heart now felt like a cruel taunt. I was stunned. This wasn't the Henry the First had fallen in love with. Around his family, he became someone else, siding with their dismissive remarks and leaving me to fend for myself against their sharp words. He was no longer the protector he once seemed, but a reflection of their arrogance and contempt. Life in that house became a daily battle, a constant reminder that my reality was far from the love and acceptance I had once hoped for. I felt like a stranger in my own life, as if I had lost my footing, my place in the world. I clung to the hope that things would change, that time would soften their attitudes toward me. But things only got worse. The stress mounted, becoming an unbearable weight that I carried in silence. Eventually, that stress began manifesting physically. Severe stomach pains became a regular part of my life. I tried to ignore them, convincing myself that it would pass. But one day, among the library's shelves, I collapsed. When I woke up in the hospital, the doctor's words hit me. My fainting was the result of accumulated stress. During my hospital stay, Henry's absence was striking. No visits, no calls, no signs of concern. His absence only deepened my feelings of isolation and abandonment. Instead of his support, I was met with an unexpected visitor, a notary, delivering shocking news. A distant great-aunt, whom I barely remembered, had left me a vast inheritance, $50 million. The revelation was like a bolt from the blue. In an instant, I had gone from a humble librarian to an extraordinarily wealthy woman. This sudden wealth instantly changed how Henry and his parents treated me. Where they once avoided showing me any genuine warmth, they now showered me with fake compassion and concern, as if by magic. Their visit to the hospital was nothing short of a performance. "We're family, and we must support each other," David declared with forced sincerity, while Michelle smiled at me with a tenderness I had never seen before. But beneath their words, I sensed something cold and foreign, a falseness I couldn't ignore. Their sudden shift was so blatant it was hard to believe in its authenticity. The truth of their motives became clear when I overheard their conversation outside my hospital room. Their words hit me like ice water. They spoke about me as if I were nothing more than a naive, lucky girl, a prospect to be exploited. They discussed strategies to bind me even tighter, suggesting that I have a child to solidify their position. Their two-faced dialogue shattered my illusions. Their interest in me was purely about my wealth, not me as a person. They valued money more than they ever valued me. That moment was a turning point for me. With new resolve, I made a firm decision to break free from their manipulations and reclaim my life. After I was discharged, I returned home to find Henry and his parents waiting for me in the living room. Their fake smiles and caring words were as transparent as glass. "Oh, Lillian, we were so worried about you," Michelle exclaimed, but I, maintaining my calm, merely nodded, hiding my true thoughts as I realized their intentions. Henry seemed attentive, but his question about the inheritance was drenched in greed. It hurt the most because the man standing before me wasn't the Henry the first once knew and loved. He was someone else, someone cold and grasping. That night, haunted by memories of their greedy voices and the overheard conversation, I couldn't find peace. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of clarity, a realization that allowed me to see reality for what it was. I began to formulate a plan. It wasn't just an escape strategy, but a way to reclaim my life, to free myself from their grasp. I was no longer going to be a pawn in their game of manipulation. It was time to stand up for myself. Each day, my plan took shape, and I gathered the courage to change my fate. I poured my feelings into letters and journal entries, releasing all the pain and disappointment I had been holding inside. The process was cathartic, liberating. The next day, I met with a lawyer, detailing all the trials I had endured and the prenuptial agreement that had been in place. His astonishment was evident, but he assured me that my actions were wise and ensured my protection. When I returned home, Henry and his parents were once again waiting in the living room. Their eyes were fixed on me as I entered, and I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "Here she is, our brave girl," David said with a fake smile, but there was no warmth in his words. I clutched my purse tightly, feeling my resolve solidify. "I have something to say," I began, and they looked at me with curiosity. I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I'm filing for divorce," I stated calmly, my voice firm and unwavering. The room was filled with a heavy, suffocating silence, as if the air itself had thickened with tension. The words about divorce echoed, leaving confusion and shock on the faces of those present. It was Michelle who first broke the silence. Her voice was full of disbelief and anger. "You dare," she shouted, barely containing her outrage, which sounded like a hidden threat in every word. Henry, pale-faced, tried to ease the situation, but his words drowned in the cold, widening rift between us. He spoke of love, claiming that everything between us had been genuine. But to me, his words felt hollow, without substance. All I could feel was the exploitation, the desire to benefit from my sudden fortune. Michelle couldn't hold back her fury. Her face hardened as she began to threaten lawsuits. "We will demand half of your inheritance," she spat, her voice dripping with malicious intent, like poison slowly seeping through veins. In response, I felt a strange strength rise within me. Their threats no longer scared me, no longer evoked the fear that had once kept me under their control. I realized that this silence wasn't a sign of weakness, but a symbol of newfound freedom. With this new sense of empowerment, I clearly declared my intention to leave, without looking back, and forbade any further contact. Their angry shouts echoed behind me for a while, but they no longer had any power over me. I stepped forward, toward my own fate, freeing myself from the chains of their manipulation with every step. Leaving wasn't easy. But as I moved farther from the house, I could feel waves of liberation growing stronger with each passing mile. For the first time in years, I breathed freely. My future began to appear bright, illuminated not by their expectations but by my own desires. I moved into a small apartment in the city. It was modest, not luxurious, but it was mine. Here, for the first time, I felt the peace I hadn't known in years. While I went through the divorce process, I slowly began to regain my inner strength, realizing that I could handle any challenge. One day, an unexpected call from my lawyer revealed another aspect of my great-aunt's inheritance. In her will, it was stated that part of my fortune was to go to charity, a reflection of her selflessness and desire to help others. This revelation was surprising and prompted me to think about what I could do for the world with my newfound position. I began to actively research charities and organizations, seeking to invest the money in something that would bring real impact. My attention was drawn to a small but significant organization that provided aid to women affected by domestic violence. I reached out to them and arranged a meeting. When I met Patricia, the woman leading the organization, I was struck by her dedication. She told me about the support they offered: legal aid, counseling, and shelters for women in difficult situations. Her stories touched me deeply. Each one was a reflection of my own pain and struggle, and I felt a profound connection to their mission. "I want to help," I declared firmly, knowing I had found a new purpose in life. Under Patricia's guidance, I allocated part of my inheritance to the construction of a new shelter for women, dedicating my resources and energy to creating a safe space for those, like me, who had once sought an escape from the darkness. The satisfaction I gained from this work was indescribable. For the first time, I felt I was doing something meaningful, and my life was regaining its sense of purpose. A few weeks later, Patricia invited me to the opening of the shelter. It was a modest gathering, but the atmosphere was filled with hope and gratitude. Among the guests, I unexpectedly saw a familiar face: Emily, my former colleague from the library. Her eyes widened in surprise as she approached me. "Lillian, is that you?" she exclaimed, her voice full of genuine joy. We embraced, and I shared with her the story of the shelter and my involvement in its creation. Emily was impressed. "This is incredible, Lillian," she said, clearly astonished by the changes I had gone through. Our reunion felt like a return to life, as if old roots were coming alive again, filled with new strength. Every moment after the event seemed to weave into a new tapestry of my life. As the last guest left, Patricia approached me, her voice warm with gratitude for my contribution. I watched the women who had found refuge within these walls, and my heart was filled with a quiet but steady warmth. This feeling of fulfillment and peace, which had eluded me for so many years, now filled my soul. Every moment I spent participating in the day-to-day life of the shelter brought me genuine joy and a sense of self-worth. I realized that I had finally chosen my own path, free from the expectations and roles imposed on me. Suddenly, my phone rang. Henry's name appeared on the screen, and my heart fluttered, tangled in mixed emotions. Curiosity outweighed reason, and, taking a deep breath, I answered, "Hello, Henry." My voice was calm and even, though inside I wrestled with contradictions. He spoke quickly and insistently, his voice trembling with barely concealed desperation. "Lillian, I need to talk to you. Please, can we meet? It's important." Despite my inner doubts, I agreed. We arranged to meet in a small, cozy cafe in the city center, a place where I felt safe, surrounded by familiar people and surroundings. When I saw Henry, I couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. His appearance reflected inner turmoil. He looked defeated, almost pathetic. His eyes, once full of arrogance and confidence, now expressed deep regret. "Lillian, I made a huge mistake," he confessed, his voice trembling with unexpected sincerity. "I want you to come back. I realize the emptiness you left behind." But despite his pleas, his confessions no longer moved me. I looked at Henry with cold indifference. Where was this sincerity when I was hurting and alone? Why now, Henry? I asked, trying to hide the disdain in my voice. He sighed heavily, as if each word was a struggle, and began to explain. Our marriage fell apart because of my parents' interference, because of my own mistakes. I was under their influence, but I've changed since then. I listened to him, but inside me, disappointment only grew. You allowed them to humiliate me. You joined in their mockery. My words were sharp and merciless, and Henry recoiled as if my accusations had left visible scars on his soul. He tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. Please, Lillian, I admit my mistakes. I've changed, he pleaded. The man I once loved now felt like a stranger to me, and all the feelings I had for him had evaporated, leaving only cold contempt. Henry, it's too late, I said, and there was no doubt in my voice. My heart is now full of nothing but disdain for you. His face twisted with pain for a moment, but then he nodded in resignation, understanding that our paths had irrevocably diverged. I stood up from my seat and left the cafe, feeling the weight of our past life lift off my shoulders. This was the end, a chapter 1 closed with determination and clarity. The next day, the shelter was set to host a special event, an unveiling of a sculpture donated by a local artist for our garden. The atmosphere at the gathering was filled with a sense of community and mutual support. When the sculpture was revealed, we were greeted by the figure of a woman reaching toward the sky, her posture symbolizing hope, resilience, and new beginnings. Applause rippled through the crowd like a wave of inspiration, and at that moment, I felt a deep connection to everyone around me. Emily, my longtime friend and colleague from the library, approached me, her face glowing with admiration. Lillian, your influence here is truly incredible, she said, and her words warmed my heart. In that moment, I realized I had truly become part of something larger, that my journey had led me to a place where I could not only help myself but others as well. Patricia, equally overjoyed by how our work had evolved, came over with a smile on her face. Her words touched the very core of my heart. Lillian, this is just the beginning. We have limitless possibilities for what we can achieve together. As I looked at the faces lit up with genuine hope, Patricia's words started to take on real meaning for me. This truly was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a chapter 1 intended to live wholeheartedly, without looking back. Becoming more involved in the daily operations of the shelter, I began to see new challenges ahead, but also new victories. My confidence grew, blossoming like a flower after a long winter. For the first time in years, I felt like the master of my own fate. Even things that once felt foreign to me, like self-defense classes, had become a natural part of my daily routine, giving me a sense of strength and control. One day, as I was leaving the shelter after a long day, I noticed a car parked near the entrance. Inside sat Michelle, my former mother-in-law. Her sudden appearance puzzled me, and when she got out of the car, I saw a hesitation in her movements, as if she wasn't sure what to do next. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. Lillian, we need to talk, she pleaded, but I felt a firmness within me I hadn't known before. There's nothing to talk about, Michelle, I responded coldly, realizing how steady my voice sounded. She didn't give up. Please, just hear me out. There was something resembling remorse in her words, and her tone hinted at a kind of sincerity, but the memories of what she had done were still too fresh. What do you want, Michelle? I asked, trying to mask my skepticism behind a calm exterior. Her answer surprised me. I want to apologize, she began, and her voice trembled. My actions were unforgivable. They cost me my son, and I don't want to lose you too. In many ways, you were like the daughter I never had, she admitted, her eyes glistening with tears. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it quickly faded under the weight of memories of her cruelty. Michelle, your apology won't erase the pain you caused me, I replied, looking away and taking a step back. I've moved on, and I suggest you do the same. Her hand reached out to me hesitantly, but I stood still. Please, Lillian. I can't change the past, but I'm here to try and make amends, she insisted. I sighed, realizing that my life was no longer tied to her apologies or redemption. It's too late, Michelle. Goodbye. With those words, I turned away, leaving her standing there, and inside me, a newfound strength took hold. The next day brought a new challenge, a letter from Henry's lawyer, stating his intention to contest our divorce settlement. I immediately reached out to my attorney, Rachel, a woman with a sharp mind and a firm grip on things. Henry has no grounds to challenge this, Lillian. The prenuptial agreement is crystal clear, she reassured me, and I felt her support as my own. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I walked into the room feeling composed and resolute. Henry was already there with his lawyer, and for a moment, our eyes met. In his gaze, I caught a glimpse of what had once connected us, but those feelings no longer stirred within me. The judge quickly ruled in my favor, upholding the prenuptial agreement and dismissing Henry's claims. With each passing minute, a sense of relief and justice washed over me. After the hearing, Henry approached me, his voice filled with regret. Lillian, I'm truly sorry for everything, he muttered, and for a brief moment, I saw the man I once loved. But now, my feelings had changed forever. Goodbye, Henry, I said, looking him straight in the eyes. Take care. Those were our final words, closing the chapter that had once bound us. As I left the courthouse, I was enveloped by a sense of liberation. It wasn't just the end of a legal process, but the conclusion of an entire chapter of my life. I was now filled with determination to begin a new era, one marked by autonomy and purpose. At the shelter, we threw ourselves into preparing for a major fundraising event. The occasion fully absorbed my attention, and seeing how the community rallied around our cause, I felt immense gratitude. The fundraising evening was filled with an atmosphere of celebration and unity. People from all walks of life had come together to support us, and for me, it became a significant milestone.